Like I was saying, we've been joined by Mr. Payne Omari. He's a senior cybersecurity consultant at KPMG Advisory Services Limited in Nairobi. His areas of specialization are in vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, red teaming, forensic investigation, incident response, as well as data privacy. Some of his work experience runs across banking, insurance, telecommunications, as well as non-governmental organizations. In his spare time, Payne moonlights as an Afro house and amapiano DJ. So Mr. Payne will take us through his career journey, which will act as a guide for those starting their cybersecurity careers. So welcome so much. Thank you for taking this time and welcome to the Cyber Shujaa mentorship session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naserian. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And can you see me?
Yes, I can see you from my side.
So one of my friends is on the call and they said they can't see me. I mean, they can't hear me. And turns out I had my earphones on the whole time. I just didn't have them in my ears. So sorry for that. Can we start?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you so much for that introduction. Before I get into it, I'd just like to say how happy I am that there's a platform like this for people like me who went through the cybersecurity program at USIU, which was chaperoned by Professor Paula Musuva. It did so much for preparing us to get into the industry. And so it's very important for me to be able to share some of the things that I've learned, and hopefully this is going to be of use. So let me get some of the most long and drawn out details out of the way by beginning with an outlook survey on security that was done by KPMG. The information in here is latest as at 2022. We are yet to have the 2023 version, but a lot of things are very specific to the landscape right now. So let me just get right into it. So some of the things I'd like to have in place as housekeeping is please use the chat box to post your questions throughout the session. I'm not sure how this usually happens, Naserian, but if there's any room for people to unmute at any point, I think we could have that towards the end of the session when we begin the Q&A. And then please ask as many questions as you possibly can. I wondered if it was a little vain of me to use this picture, but it should suffice for today. So when we talk about the cybersecurity outlook survey, there's quite a number of items that KPMG tends to look at. So KPMG is a consulting firm with many different lines of service. So my domain is within risk consulting, specifically cybersecurity. So one of the challenges that I'm sure some of you within the Cyber Shujaa program have already come across is that we don't always have up-to-date and lengthy sources of information that you can rely on as far as information just around the cyber landscape in Africa is concerned. Some of those have to do with simply not having enough sources of primary information which has been collated, so some sort of data bank. And some of the other things are there's always some obscurity that comes with reporting on some of the matters within the African continent. And this is just a general fact outside of cybersecurity. And so that presents a number of challenges for those who are interested in getting into cybersecurity, is that one, the sources of information are not readily available unless you're in an institution that has dedicated its services and efforts to providing that space. And then two, much as with other things, you sort of end up being left out because when some of these technological advancements are taking place, unfortunately, we are not always included at the onset, and that makes it more of an afterthought. Which is quite strange for me, considering just how advanced some of our enterprises are and how unique some of our cyber risk tends to be. So I'm going to have a run through. The first part of my presentation is going to cover some of the profiles of the respondents and some of the insights that, if internalized, will actually help you over the course of trying to establish your niche within cybersecurity, and also to position yourself strategically in a way that allows you to know what exactly the landscape looks like. So this is what I hope you'll get out of the first part of the presentation. So once I get this out of the way, I'm going to give you a run through of what my journey has been, and then we can finish off with some questions. So I hope you've had everything I've said. Hope I can now get into it. So the profile of the respondents for the cybersecurity outlook survey covered quite a number of business sectors. We have financial services, we have manufacturing, ICT, of course, government and public sector, as well as energy and natural resources. So most of our respondents are actually SMEs, so small to medium-sized enterprises, with 44% being large enterprises. So we had respondents from Kenya, Ghana, Uganda, Nigeria, Rwanda, Mozambique, Tanzania, just to mention a few. So one of the things about the changing cybersecurity landscape is that Africa has always been a fast-growing digital behemoth, if I can refer to it as that, with some statistics such as the unique number of mobile subscribers reaching 615 million by 2025, as well as the proliferation of digital services, which has led to an explosion in digital ecosystems. So what this means is that the attack surface for a lot of malicious actors has widened. And that means that security has become a major challenge for African enterprises and even governmental agencies as well. I think we've seen the news going round about some of the denial of service attacks that have been meted upon e-citizen. This is just, a local example that is very fresh. So a lot of us have tried to respond by putting in place some cybersecurity legislation. And the map on the right shows the countries covered in blue, which have already implemented cyber legislation. The ones that are in gray have no legislation at all. And the one in light blue are countries which have some sort of draft legislation. So this is pretty much a huge number of countries within Africa that already have adopted some sort of national cybersecurity legislation. So when we think of some of the efforts that are being put in to address cyber-related threats, a lot of them have been around what enterprises can do to improve their security posture, as well as what we can do to make sure that cyber talent is being cultivated quickly enough so that the gaps that we have existing within enterprise as well as government across different lines of service actually have enough people who are able to stand in and take up those roles. And for the longest time, what we've been hearing is that part of the strategic challenge is that we do not have enough cyber talent, or that the talent that does exist perhaps does not possess the requisite skills to be able to take on these roles more effectively. So when we look at some of the initiatives that have been put in place by ECOWAS, which was the West African Response on Cybersecurity and the Fight Against Cybercrime, as well as FCDO, which is the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. There is an attempt to try and ensure that awareness is quite high and that the skills within these African countries is actually able to deal with these challenges in a very demanding landscape. So what this means is that there has to be a concerted effort to be able to address the recommendations that we keep having on how to build an effective cybersecurity strategy. So what we realized as part of the results from the survey is that 27% of our respondents did have a strategy linked to a specific threat profile with measurable KPIs. This means that a very small number had actually adjusted their goals in measurable ways, bringing in the KPIs to be able to deal with some of the cyber risk issues. So 75% did have a strategy that is regularly refreshed to be in alignment with the organization's threat profile, but 25% of them do not have recently updated strategy and are usually reliant on ad hoc and responsive efforts. So this means that the 25% often wait for some major events in the form of incidents usually for them to be able to have anything that is related to cyber within their strategy. So most of the organizations had a mix of how they approach to about how they have how they approach information security oversight. 34% have a functional structure that allows the organizational leadership as well as risk management to provide a level of oversight. 47% had it incorporated into IT security and reports to the chief information officer or the equivalent within that organization. And 17% have no formal information security function. So it's important for us to notice that there's a variety of factors that result in the statistics we have on the screen right now. And a lot of that has to do with budget, strategy, as well as the availability of cyber talent. So this means that the incorporation of information security as a function into IT security is something that isn't quite a one-size-fits-all approach, but is a commonly held view that the security function as IT operations often tends to have inherent conflicting goals. So in my experience, you find that these units within an organization have been siloed off from each other, making it very difficult for them to speak in one voice because there is an aspect of a lack of harmony in terms of the operations and how both of them work together to make sure that IT security has been addressed. So some of the things that would help in terms of having a cybersecurity strategy that's fit for purpose is having an understanding of your crown jewels. So each and every organization is different in that the resources that they consider to be most valuable vary from one industry to another, and then when you get into a granular level from one organization to another. So it's quite easy to prioritize your security risks in order of the likelihood of the risk maturing, as well as what kind of risk is affected by that particular asset. The next is to evaluate the cyber threat landscape. Again, I go back to what I mentioned earlier on that the cybersecurity landscape for Africa is quite unique. And then when you drill it down to the different countries, you realize that we have very unique threats that have to be addressed instead of having an approach where we are trying to look at what's happening in other economies and then trying to fit the same internally. Next is assessing the current state maturity. So this is something that will present an opportunity for some of the people who are in this cohort and are not very keen on the bare bones security services, So I'm talking about people who have a very keen interest on cyber strategy, cyber governance, cyber maturity assessments, but they don't necessarily want to get into the specifics of penetration testing, red teaming, blue teaming, and all of those other aspects of security that require you to have a more hands-on approach to the technical aspects of cyber. This is something that meshes very well with having a great cybersecurity strategy, because we all need to understand that there's an aspect of governance, risk, and compliance within cybersecurity. It's not just the hooded hacker in a dimly looking room who you have to worry about. There's an entire ecosystem of people and different roles for us to play. So this comes down to having a leader for cybersecurity within an organization who is often the chief information security officer, who is supposed to obtain a certain level of buy-in, and then that buy-in is relied upon to be able to meet the cyber goals. So the next question becomes, how do you safeguard privacy in the face of growing threats? I think we've had quite a number of debates over the recent past, especially with the uptake in artificial intelligence over the recent past. And some of the reports that we've been getting ever since from different bodies of knowledge are quite worrying. So, for example, an Interpol report from January 2020 to February 2021 had South Africa having 230 million cyber attacks, while Kenya and Morocco had 72 million and 71 million respectively. So these are simply threats that did mature and were notified as either being successful or an attempt that managed to go through the entire kill chain up until a point where we are able to identify that this is an attempt on whatever resource. So tactics are changing, and we have all sorts of attempts, right? From distributed denial of service attacks, kind of like what we've seen on eCitizen, as well as other Kenyan websites and web servers that have been affected in the recent past. So part of the reason why we've seen an uptick in some of these attacks is because the digital touch points that we have within technology and how they interface with us as human beings is the touch points are increasing and exponentially so. Just the other day, we've seen WorldCoin, the project that has been co-founded by the ChatGPT founder, where essentially, for those who now get into cryptocurrency, the consensus system they're using is proof of being human, essentially, where you need to scan your iris for that to be proof that you are a human being, and then you get some sort of coins as part of what is in circulation. So when you think about the number of ways we interact with technology, there's a lot of privacy risk simply because of the kind of information that is being accessed by our devices. So it becomes a problem when we are pushing out these services rather quickly, faster than our defenses can be able to handle, because then the emphasis becomes on putting the products out and technological advancements, and then cybersecurity becomes an afterthought. So according to a survey, 1 in 5 respondents from organizations did not have a clearly defined strategy or framework to mitigate security and privacy risks. So that is certainly something quite worrying. Moving on, we have a challenge of linking cybersecurity and privacy as well. The privacy landscape is tricky because we often do not have fit for purpose legislation. One, we do not usually have the mechanisms of being able to aggregate and analyze data to better service our consumers in a way that protects them from cyber criminals. So right from how we do payments, how we are able to interface with, say, some of the services being offered even by the government or just private enterprise, we don't understand the risks at every point of that cycle. And so that results in some sort of underestimation of what the privacy risks are, as opposed to what the overall cybersecurity risk is. So, for example, we often pour all our efforts to secure information on corporate servers, but we neglect to consider that the same sensitive information may be shared by executives on a popular chat application, for example, which is something that we see with senior management in quite a number of entities. Speaking from experience, where the head brass at any organization ends up being quite a key target for cyber criminals. So we have some of the footnotes pointing to other different reports. One of them is an Ericsson report on how the COVID-19 pandemic triggered an increase in online education and remote working. So I'm going to share a list of these resources, as well as the complete version of this report towards the end of the session. So consistency is something that ought to be key. This is in terms of having a standard approach to proactively identifying data privacy risks on systems and products. So 74% of respondents in our survey indicated that they did have a standard approach for proactively identifying data privacy risks. 15% disagreed, and then 11% were not sure. So this means that about 1 in 4 people apply, once again, a very ad hoc or non-consistent approach to mitigating data privacy risks. So we're also not at a point where cyber risk is talked about enough, because some of these things become more imminent when risks mature and you have an attack taking place or an incident that results in some sort of denial. So with the evolving cyber and privacy regulatory landscape, there's an attempt to try and make sure that we have a better understanding of the kind of information we collect. Organizations now need to ensure privacy compliance with quite a number of emerging privacy laws, such as the Data Protection Act in Kenya, for example. And I'm sure by now we have had quite a number of different information sources on the implications of the GDPR. So regulation is certainly helping get us to a point where these are considerations that are being made. So organizations may not have clear data protection and governance approach, which is led by a data protection officer. So just to have a bit of a segue into what I would describe some of the boring things within cyber that do not exude the kind of excitement that you would if, say, you hacked into someone's account, or if you were able to process a transaction without any sort of authorization. We have an entire world of cyber governance that is also in dire need of professionals. So with what I've discussed so far, it's becoming quite clear that we need to have more data privacy experts, especially since it's only been, I think, 2 years since we implemented and promulgated the Data Protection Act. And so what professionals do we have at this level who have an inkling of what some of the needs are? And so one of the things that I'll say right off the bat before I get into what my personal experience has been is that it's very important for us to have an understanding of what is happening in the industry so that we're able to position ourselves better, even as we keep seeking opportunities. So this means that we shouldn't limit our thinking to just, say, CTFs or offensive security or aspects of cyber that are more mainstream. There's room for us to discuss other things that might not necessarily tie in with the bare bones offensive security things, but have an implication across the entire cyber landscape. So essentially what I'm saying is we need to have an understanding of what the bigger picture is so that we can make more informed decisions, and also just to have an idea of what the options are for ourselves. I think one of the things that really helped for me going through university and having having access to some of these forums is for my mind to be open to the wide and vast array of possibilities that do exist. So the more you know about the industry, the better you are in a position to not only work towards achieving the skills that are necessary, but also finding your footing in what is something that we keep hearing over and over again doesn't have enough staff. So winding this section up, we've also identified that SMEs tend to lag behind larger corporates. I had begun the presentation with a short conversation on how budget tends to affect the ability of organizations to harmonize their strategy with best practice within cybersecurity, as well as the enhancement of their defense by ensuring that they have more cybersecurity personnel within their departments and within the organization. So there is a challenge, but that presents a risk in that the experiences of their larger counterparts, as well as the good practices of the larger counterparts, can be leveraged upon by SMEs for them to be in a position of protecting themselves from the privacy risks as well as the security risks. So I can tell you for a fact that some of these SMEs tend to have an even wider attack surface, or to experience attacks probably at a higher clip than, say, big organizations. So of course, that's because they don't have the same kind of protections, but it's also because cybersecurity has not been implemented by design. So we are seeing small organizations hiring more cybersecurity staff. This is in an attempt to be able to address the growing risks, despite not having, say, the thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars that would be required to buy into these existing cybersecurity solutions. So the next part has to do with cybersecurity talent. And I think this is to say, for those who are interested in pursuing a career in this field, really are in the right place at the right time. I'm not sure if this is something that is always apparent to us at the point of listening to what other people have to say, especially who are already consultants or people who are within the job market, or even your instructors within the Cyber Shuja program, or even within university. There's usually some sort of obscurity between the people who have just either finished their studies, whether that's tertiary institutions other than universities, or even universities themselves, or people who simply don't have that kind of background in education. And that's because most of the stories we tend to hear are from people who've had significant experience within the job market. So in between, very few people actually know what to do, and very few people know where to get some of the guidance from, or even the information from. So you have this situation where you're telling graduates, for example, or telling young people looking for jobs in cyber that, cyber is something that a lot of organizations are really looking at increasing. They're looking for talent, but the talent simply isn't there. But then you might find that you just haven't seen these adverts. You just don't know about these organizations that are hiring. So hopefully the next section I'm about to go through gives you an understanding of what the industry thinks about cyber talent, and then what you can do about it to position yourself better for the job market. So according to the survey we did, about 2 in 3 enterprises encounter challenges in recruiting and retaining qualified cyber professionals. So for those of you who may already be aware, there's been an increased attrition rate across the industry, which people have referred to as the Great Resignation. This is during COVID and post-COVID. And this is quite an interesting phenomenon considering that there has been a surge in demand for cybersecurity. So when you combine this with the fact that young professionals now are also less likely to stay in jobs that they do not find fulfilling, you find that it's quite something to see the attrition rates that these organizations are dealing with. So this gap is expected to widen from what we now have at 3 million cybersecurity job vacancies globally to 10 million vacancies in the near future. And the advent of remote work has allowed a lot of individuals within Africa and Kenya to be able to access opportunities that are not domiciled within our country, but with other countries and other places that perhaps we would not have been able to work with before. So another thing that has been taking place is organizations have been outsourcing their cybersecurity functions into managed services providers who are giving them a more affordable alternative as opposed to having full-time staff. But there's also a risk of outsourcing cyber to a third-party service provider who might not necessarily have the kind of security controls that make these entities comfortable with trusting them with their cybersecurity solutions as well as cybersecurity protection. The next interesting insight we got is that 1 in 4 respondents felt that sourcing talent was a major problem. In Kenya, the biggest challenge has been the linking of these graduates or just cyber talent in general with the relevant opportunities. And this is something that makes me really happy with Cyber Shuja, because that is an initiative that is directly aimed at making this imbalance and this disconnect a bit less commonplace than it is right now. But the thing that I'd say is that we have a challenge in the hiring practices for most organizations. So if you think about some of the things that you're told at the point of trying to get a job, there's certain qualifications that have been the bare minimum for the longest time. Some of those being having a university degree, having certain professional courses under your belt, having secured an internship before. I think you'll see a lot of tongue-in-cheek comments about needing 10 years of experience for something that is otherwise an entry-level job. And in other instances, you simply may not have the connection that some of these individuals may have with someone who knows about a vacancy. So if you don't know someone who understands that there's a vacancy that hasn't been that well advertised, it's very difficult for you to understand what opportunities you can be able to apply for. And now what that has meant is there's a very specific archetype within cybersecurity resources which often locks them out from said opportunities. So you can only imagine how many how many applicants miss out on cyber opportunities because they're not university graduates. You can only imagine how many miss out on these opportunities because of not having work experience. Some of the things that you can do about it have a lot to do with how you present yourself at the point of having conversations with employers or contractors who have these opportunities. So a lot of that are the soft skills, cloud computing expertise, security controls and coding skills. Some of these things do not exist in isolation. So what I've come to find in my experience is my my work experience would have been even more manageable than it was if I had placed even more emphasis on things that were not necessarily cybersecurity skills, but contributed to the overall understanding of computer science or something like BBIT or IST, which are IT courses and information systems with a bias for business. or even computer-related courses that have some sort of inkling that leans towards math and statistics. So the bigger picture is having a foundation in some of these disciplines that are not directly related to cybersecurity actually give you a platform to be able to understand how to fit into some of these situations a lot better. The other challenge that I think exists is having access to training. For that reason, there's a couple of links that I've put together. I'm going to share them at the end of the presentation for online labs that you can be able to access to have a variety of experiences, whether that's defensive security and offensive security. One of the most interesting ones is Cyber Million. This is a program that's been recently revealed by Immersive Labs. I don't know if you're familiar with Immersive Labs, as well as I believe Accenture. So they're giving free vouchers to individuals who are interested in having access to some of the training material that I've just mentioned. Some of them also come in the form of lab subscriptions. For those of you who have emails associated with schools, there's a massive discount coming to something like 500 or 700 shillings a month. Now, depending on your situation, that may or may not be a lot of money to be able to set aside. But the overall understanding is that by having some sort of extracurricular activity, which is pushing your understanding of cyber to what is out there right now, it's quite possible for you to get the requisite skills without some sort of formal education that might otherwise be a hindrance. And this is especially the case if, say, you don't have a university degree, or you're in the process of working on getting something that would be the equivalent of a university degree. So the percentage of organizations that have enough cyber resources for their needs based on the sector is shown on the screen right now. 24% have enough cyber resources within financial services. Government has 29%, ICT has 36%. FMCGs, fast-moving consumer goods, have 38%, and then 47 and 48% respectively for energy and natural resources, as well as manufacturing. So no one has met the 50% threshold for saying that they actually do have enough cyber resources. So the sector is definitely going to catch up with the job market. But what I can say is that there is an acute demand for cyber skills, especially within the African landscape. In fact, across financial institutions, a report by Carnegie actually shows that the financial sector within Africa has been the largest employer of cybersecurity professionals. This is because of the criticality of cyber skills right now. So cyber skills resourcing, you will right now, I see a lot of adverts recruiting cyber resources, but some of them, especially for entry-level jobs, are not entirely readily available to those who are interested. One of the things that we found is that a higher proportion of SMEs reported that recruiting cyber resources is a major problem compared with large enterprises. And one of the reasons for this is large enterprises have the benefit of, one, historical data. They have a great understanding of how their cyber strategy needs at any point in time is linked to the overall strategy for the organization. So it's very easy for that to trickle down well into recruitment, so that at any point in time, say the resourcing department is able to have a candid conversation about what they need to be able to address the cyber skills that they may not have at that point in time. Conversely, an SME might not have cybersecurity baked into their strategy. And so what that means is they'll either find out about cybersecurity and its importance at the point of an attack, or if they do want to get that level of resourcing, they might not necessarily know where to look. or how to frame some of these opportunities in a way that allows them to get the talent that they're looking for. So this is something that became quite clear for us over the course of this survey. So setting up high performance cybersecurity teams is something that ought to be done, right from revamping the recruitment process and criteria. This is something that I've mentioned earlier on, where people with in-demand skill sets like data analytics and risk management and even cloud computing could be hired and then converted into well-rounded cyber professionals. The other thing would be changing what has traditionally been relied upon by lots of organizations, such as a certain number of work experience or even university degrees or postgraduate degrees for some of the opportunities that I've seen. So I won't get into the specifics of developing in-house talent or embedding advanced technology for security, because a lot of those have enterprise implications. But that's what I can say about what we are seeing within the cyber skills shortage. So we're coming to an end of what we have so far on interesting observations. The next has to do with the number of attacks we keep seeing day in, day out. And we see that the number of attacks have been on a rise within Africa, and Kenya has been no exception. I think we've been seeing at least 15 or 20 publicized attacks this year alone. And there's obviously some that we don't get to hear about simply because there isn't a culture of disclosing some of these attacks within the public domain. In some cases, with good reason, because you tend to have an idea of the kind of hysteria that that might cause, because you're talking about the financial institutions which have the responsibility of securing people's assets or people's financial resources. Some of them are governmental agencies, and you can imagine the kind of public trust erosion that takes place whenever it does come out that attacks have been successful. Some of the conversations happening right now because of what's happened with the e-citizen platform, for example, is a really great opportunity for us to see how people react to the idea that what is essentially a critical service for the citizens of the country, for example, isn't as secure as you'd want to believe it is. So some of the reasons behind why this takes place are very esoteric in nature and require quite a technical explanation. But for the layman, the understanding is that we're not safe, we've gotten hacked into, and that has some implication on the kind of understanding that we have. So we have 26% of attacks being faced by African companies coming in the form of business email compromise. So we also have 17% at ransomware, 16% at data leakage. One of those is the Kenya Airports Authority attack, where we saw some information being leaked online. 13% is denial of service, 11% is the insider threat, and then 5% at the supply chain attack. So we noticed that 46% of the organizations do not have a standard approach to data protection and privacy and cybersecurity, and that would explain why we have seen the kind of attacks that we have been seeing. So having an ad hoc approach really means that we'll deal with the risk as soon as it comes to the foreground. Ransomware is something that has been quite a challenge, because the focus has been on preventing attacks happening within the response plan of a lot of organizations, and not necessarily focusing on ransomware as a threat, because as you can see, 25% of the respondents feel that their general efforts are enough and that it will suffice. So 13% said that more effort had been placed on responding and recovering from such an attack. with 26% saying that they are well prepared to combat and, if necessary, recover from a ransomware attack. Now, whether that is based on a false sense of confidence for some organizations remains unclear, but this is something that gets more advanced as the days move by, simply because of how much research goes into coming up with different forms of attacks, which organizations might not necessarily be prepared for. So in terms of cyber awareness, this is another opportunity for those interested in pursuing a career in cybersecurity. There's a lack of cybersecurity awareness. And this is something that points me at a soft skill that I think is very important for each and every one of us. Finding the risk is something that is super and is very important, but more often than not, you find that techies, and this is something across different lines of service within IT, a lot of us may not have the capability of explaining cyber risk in a way that is easy to understand and in a way that explains the risk without being too technical or without using terms that might not be easy to understand at the onset. So one of the opportunities here and one of the pieces of advice I'd have is that it's important for us to understand something to the point where we can explain it to someone who does not have prior knowledge in cybersecurity. So instead of having a reliance on the buzzwords and some of the technical aspects, cybersecurity becomes a priority once you understand it. And understanding it means that it needs to be shrouded in less technicality and more simplistic terms. So there's some information on recovering from a cybersecurity incident. I'm not going to get into that. I think I've started to run out of time. But what I'd want to finish with is the regional analysis. And this is something that is going to be very useful for those of us on the call who have a certain interest in niche areas within cyber. So some of the industries that you should be on the lookout for are financial services, energy and natural resources, as well as IT. This is in Eastern Africa. That's because we've been experiencing a lot of ransomware attacks, business email compromise, and data leakage. Southern Africa has been experiencing the same, but the number of attacks and frequency has been a bit different from what is in Eastern Africa. But there's also a need for the security of information systems within manufacturing. And then in Western Africa, denial of service attacks have taken have taken the lead in terms of the attacks that have been taking place. So the top three sectors, as you can see, are more or less similar. So we're talking about financial services, as well as energy and natural resources, ICT, and lastly, manufacturing. So please keep that in mind, even as you look at some of the organizations that you can be able to assist when it comes to the cyber risk that they experience. So some of the key takeaways that I would want to share with you have to do with governments and implementing regulations which are going to nurture the cyber talent pool. And that's going to assist in tackling the resource shortage. But at the same time, there needs to be an aspect of organizations responding to new needs and the new workforce, which has often been subject to some may call an outdated way of being able to recruit and present the opportunities to the individuals interested in these positions. And of course, we need to integrate cyber focus into our core strategy. So as I now want to go into what my personal experience has been, I just want to give a short overview of what happened to me for me to explore cybersecurity up until it being a mainstay for me. as well as what some of the important things that I've experienced helped shape my understanding of what exactly I can do within this space. So I hope I still have everyone's attention. I just have a few more experiences to share, and then we can call it a day. So my first interaction with cybersecurity was in high school. We had this arrangement where we'd get access to the computer lab, and it got to a point where the time that we had, the contact time we had with the computers would be reduced. And so this isn't something I'm entirely happy to talk about, but in response, what I ended up doing was learning about batch files and some of the ways you could use batch files to propagate viruses in a network. And so what I did was I learned how to make a batch file virus, and I was able to run them on a number of computers within the cyber lab, within the IT lab at the time. And so a lot of these computers needed to be formatted, because how the batch file worked was it would keep replicating to the point where it exhausted all the threads that it possibly could within that processor for that computer. And so it was an infinite loop of just opening and opening certain windows. That was that. It didn't really make me think about cybersecurity the way I do now. But the thing that struck me was that there actually is an element of securing our IT environments. So what happened next was I now moved into finishing high school and thinking about the next thing that I needed to do. Because for a lot of us, the next best thing is usually thinking about what you're going to do. Are you going to join university? Do you even have the opportunity to do so? Are you going to do a course related to IT? Because there's a lot of us don't always know what we want to do. And so I ended up joining USIU and picking information systems and technology, which is essentially business and IT. At the time, I still didn't have any inkling on whether I'd get into cybersecurity, but I did have an idea of some of the specializations, which included forensics and cybercrime. So because of some of the adverts that they do for professional courses at a very subsidized rate within my university at the time, I enrolled for I enrolled for the CEH exam and the CEH training. And this, I think, was within my second or first year at USIU. And my instructor at the time, who is Madam Paula Musuva, I was able to learn about the specifics. And at that time, there was a lot of talk about Russian hackers from advanced persistent threats and different groups. There was also a lot of conversation about NSA tools leaking. And so, and then there was also a lot of chatter about Anonymous, the hacking group. And so there was a lot of interest coming in from my end. And so just like that, I found myself really curious about cybersecurity. Now, the things that I didn't understand at the time was the importance of embracing agility within cybersecurity. So what I now know is that the more you understand from an IT perspective, the easier it is for you to understand cyber risk and to be a better cybersecurity professional. But that wasn't very apparent to me at the time. But I still learned as much as I possibly could, though my bias was just on offensive hacking, offensive security, and a lot of cyber warfare and terrorism, because that was something I became really curious about. We had a very interesting group of like-minded individuals who were keen on starting an IT cybersecurity club, because one of the most important things in cybersecurity, I think, is community. There's so many lessons to be learned from those who have come before us, and it usually smoothens the way. because at the time, as a result of the interactions I had with Madam Paula, I was able to meet people from Africa Hackon, for example, Mini Africa Hackon, people like Dr. Bright, people like Solomon Thuo, so many different people who had the kind of skills that I would hope to have one day. And I would otherwise not have access to those people if it wasn't for community. So the lesson there is to be in a position of finding out where the communities are, whether that's a WhatsApp group. There's so many WhatsApp groups that are security focused that have loads and loads of resources, and they'll talk about dumps, for example, with information that you can get. They'll have videos and instruction manuals, they'll have tutorials, and most importantly, they'll tell you about any opportunities that do come up over the course of what they're looking at. So we did try to set up a sort of mini cybersecurity club. And then came the idea of setting up the first cybersecurity conference within USIU. It was very interesting. It wasn't that packed. I think we had maybe 120, 140 attendees. But the idea that people were that interested in cybersecurity, or that we would have very engaging addresses and presentations from people who were more experienced than we were, was very encouraging, because it seemed to me that there was an opportunity to explore even more than I already had. Then what that did for me is it opened me up to the different industries and different opportunities that are already present, but they're not necessarily cybersecurity related. A personal example is there was an international relations symposium that came up, an inter-university one, so quite a number of universities across the country. But what they were talking about was, I think the theme was emerging trends or the impact of technology on international relations. And then I got the idea of presenting about cyber risk and how cyber warfare is now something that states and state actors have to account for, simply because wars now are also being fought from a digital standpoint. So the interesting thing about it is that wasn't necessarily a cybersecurity or an IT related platform, but the fact that there was but the fact that there was, let me call it a confluence of IT and the impact it's having on different aspects, allowed me to get into understanding what exactly I could do about cyber. And that's, I think, another lesson that I can share, because the ability to notice that cyber risk is implicit in each and every field, whether that's international relations, whether that's IT, whether that's manufacturing, energy, there's an element of cyber risk provided computers are being used and computational devices are being relied upon. Thankfully, I went on to get first place in that specific symposium. And now that just gave me all the energy I needed and the motivation I needed to pursue this from a serious standpoint, where I'm actually convinced that I'm actually going to pursue cybersecurity. So that was wind beneath my wings. And the next thing I know, we're about to finish university and graduate, but I'm not entirely sure about where to go. Again, one of the challenges for a lot of us, and maybe some of us are on the call, at the time, it wasn't very clear to us that there were cybersecurity opportunities for entry-level positions. So I saw a graduate recruitment drive being done by consulting companies. At the time, that was Deloitte, PwC, and KPMG. And so I went through the entire approval, the entire recruitment process. I didn't know, to be honest, I didn't know what kind of cyber services they had. I just knew that they would have cybersecurity as one of their offerings within ICT. And fast forward to getting an offer and joining the team, I was able to find out that cybersecurity consulting is such a, it's full blown and there's so many opportunities for us to be able to get through it. Now, when I look back at some of the training that I had gotten previously, there's a lot that I had managed to get from my training simply by being in some of the forums, such as the Cyber Shujaa one that you're now in, which prepared me even before I knew that that was something I needed to be aware of. So, for example, when you look at the slide that we have on the screen right now, having a proactive threat identification and defense being critical for effective prevention. On the second paragraph, you're seeing issues on cyber skill shortages and technologies such as EDR, SOAR, and SIEM solutions. So I literally learned about SIEM solutions when I was going through my university training because of Paula Musuva, who was guiding us through IBM QRadar. And having a SIEM solution at the time was not certainly as commonplace as it was right now. But the fact that there was someone within the field who was letting us know about some of those developments and even offering the training, I was able to be aware about it. But now the challenge comes in when you're not curious enough to explore some of those opportunities, because if you don't approach it with a blank mind, a blank slate where you simply want to find out how to proceed, it becomes difficult for you to understand when opportunities are coming in. And that brings me to the other piece of advice that I wanted to share with you today. And it's that whenever opportunities come your way, they rarely announce themselves in a way that's very obvious or in a way that is very attractive to the point where you can see a direct linkage between going through that opportunity and making the most of it and getting a desired outcome. Very rarely will the decisions that you'll make that will have a huge impact on your life uh, have a white smoke moment. It's usually the small things, and that's one of the things that hasn't changed even in my experience to this day, where it's usually the whispers that you get, it's usually the fleeting ideas, it's usually that 5-minute conversation you had with someone who perhaps is more experienced than you are. It's usually the ideas that you might brush aside based off of the things you read. It might be something that you come across even by chance. And those are some of the things that end up making the difference. And so what I can say about that particular piece of advice is be like a sponge, take up as much as you possibly can from your environment. And then the process of filtration should only happen once you have learned as much as you can about something, even if it's just general knowledge. But if your approach is to filter things first in a way that you close yourself off to what you think is specific to you, especially very early on in your career, you find that you disadvantage yourself in a way that you have a one-track mind, for example, or you're tunnel visioned about what you think you should do, when maybe the opportunities to grow and to be well prepared for the job market, for example, actually showed up in ways that you had not anticipated. So sometimes it really is just the little things. So now, fast forward, it's been, I think, 4 years now since I joined KPMG as a cybersecurity consultant. Some of the things that I've been grateful about have been the exposure to the different kinds of challenges that clients come in with, and that's across different industries. So that gives me a very holistic view of knowing what exactly people are having challenges with at any point in time. But also, what that has made clear for me is the importance of having forums where people can actually learn as much as they can without necessarily being in those spaces. So if the knowledge can come to the young professionals or to the people who aspire to be in those positions long before they can get into some of those rooms, then we are creating a culture of giving back and helping each and every one of us to get through. One of my passions is to share as much as I possibly can in whatever setting, because no one is going to come and hand us some of these opportunities, and no one is coming to save us pretty much. And I think I've always been a proponent of or a firm believer in us finding the solutions to our cyber challenges in-house. Fine, I understand that there's a lot of advanced threats and a lot of advanced training in other parts of the world, but some of the advancements we've made with, things as simple as mobile money are such massive technological inventions and innovations that other more developed parts of the world are struggling with, but that has presented a very interesting set of challenges for us. So if you think about the kind of cyber fraud that is committed through phishing scams or even phishing, so that's voice phishing, you find that that is something that is unique to us simply because of the proliferation of mobile money and how that has exposed, say, some of the elderly people in our community to cyber risk, when perhaps a number of years ago that was something they didn't need to think about. So there's a lot of emphasis to be placed on growing our skills in-house, because we do have the experience and we do have the expertise to do so. So when I now come to winding up my presentation for today, there's four things that I would want to leave you with. The first is that it's important to embrace the agility within cybersecurity. Cybersecurity isn't just cybersecurity. It's a combination of all sorts of practices within IT. Next is to embrace discomfort. Some of the things that would have prepared me even better to this day for cybersecurity as an industry are some of the difficult things. If it's regular expressions in computer programming, if it's within data structures, if it's understanding databases, I would tell you that the basics are the things that prepare you a lot better. So that would bring me to the third lesson, which is to embrace the basics. So networking, data structures, and the basics of computer organizations, and of course, programming, these are things that will really help. And then I'm going to end that list with saying that it pays to be a little delusional. Uh, I say this with actually, I was about to say it with a lot of lightness, but it does pay to be a little delusional in the sense that you have to be responsible for creating your own reality in a way that you're able to see yourself positively enough to know that you are capable of achieving the goals that you have within this industry. So whether it's having aspirations to get to some of the most senior positions that perhaps you don't even know anyone who is in that position, but there's a reality somewhere within your mind that has made it possible for you to envision yourself in that situation, then by all means, please go for it. Because one of the most boring things about this line of work is the constant research, the constant practice, and the long hours that you have to put whenever you're working or even preparing to get into a role. And the things that will give you the strength to push through, and perhaps this applies to anyone within IT, is that consistent hunger and desire to be able to learn as much as you can. And it's very difficult to do if you don't have that burning desire to get the best that you possibly can out of yourself. So if it feels uncomfortable for you to have the kind of dreams and aspirations that you have, then my opinion is that you're probably on the right track. So I think that brings me to the end of what I had for you today. If there's any questions, I would be happy to get right into it and respond to any comment or any clarification that someone on the call might have for what we've just gone through. Thank you so much, Hope.
Hello, thank you so much for that extensive overview. on the cybersecurity threat model in Africa, and also giving us a view of your journey and what we should be looking out for. So we'll take 2 questions, if that's fine. Any questions, comments? Okay, Davis, you can go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Payne. I think we have given a very detailed overview of cybersecurity landscape and even career-wise. So for me, just a question whereby you find yourself in an organization and the culture is a bit tough in terms of cybersecurity, in that you may find that some engineers are difficult to work with to implement some of these policies and stuff. So what's the best way to go about this so that to ensure there's no friction between information security maybe department and other departments within the organization?
Thanks, Davis. I think that's a great question. Let me just resound what you've asked so that I just verify that I get the essence of the question. So is the question about getting buy-in within an organization where perhaps there's friction between the information security team and maybe other departments within the organization that it interfaces with? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a very difficult question because cybersecurity, at least the way I view it, is a golden thread that runs across all manners of operation within an organization. And when it comes to decision making, and generally how operations are set up, we can view it from the 3 different levels of leadership. So we can look at it from the strategic level, which is where the company's, the organization's long-term and strategic goals are set up. We can then come to a second level, which would be the tactical level, which is in charge of short-term to medium-term running and management of the organization. And then now down to operations, which could have the people who are responsible for the day-to-day activities of any organization. So how the best way to answer that question is, one, to pay attention to where the bottleneck could be, because I know this is cliche, but the tone usually is set from the top. If cybersecurity, number one, isn't a priority for the organization, then it's very difficult to get buy-in from the decision makers, whether that's increasing the staff, revamping the strategy to include cybersecurity, and in some cases, as you've mentioned, making recommendations and expecting implementation to take place. If there isn't someone within that strategic level who is sponsoring the ideas and making it clear that that is a priority, then it becomes difficult for it to trickle down all the way to operations. So that's one, if you're looking at it from that level. The second aspect is, it's not always entirely clear how cybersecurity fits into the day-to-day activities of an organization, simply because we have not broken it down to our everyday business objectives, depending on what the organization does. So now this is part of what my presentation was about when I was talking about how we communicate our ideas within cybersecurity to those around us. It requires a lot of patience in an organization where the cyber maturity level is not that high, because more often than not, the outcome will be what you've mentioned, a lot of friction. And then two, if we have not found ways of interfacing with those around us, that is understanding what the other departments are doing within the organization, to establishing synergies between the people who interface with cybersecurity. So for example, even if I have a brilliant idea that's going to help us address a very pertinent cyber risk that is very real, unfortunately, if I am not able to communicate that with someone who doesn't have the best relationship with me, and this idea, its success is reliant on the said person to be able to have buy-in or to just simply take me at my word, then more often than not, some of these things fail. And that brings me to the last point of my response to that question, is a lot of the things that I've noticed ever since I got into the industry is it's not always the raw facts and figures that are always going to make the difference with a decision being made. Sometimes it comes down to relationships and having good working relationships at that. And that might make the difference between whether an idea is actually taken in and an idea is not. And maybe this is something that you may have experienced already. A lot of us in IT usually have a challenge in communicating our specific technical and operational goals and ideas with those who might be more business oriented or with those who might not have the kind of technical training that we do. And that brings me to the preparation that I mentioned earlier on of being an all-rounded professional, whether that's our ability to break down complex concepts into very simple and understandable ideas, or even the ability to present a business case in whatever setting we find ourselves in. So what that means is it's not enough to be technically adept at cybersecurity. There's a very strong implication on our ability to explain ourselves in a way that is as simple as humanly possible without watering down the importance of what we're trying to communicate. I don't know if that has answered your question, Davis. I see that Madam Paula is also on the call. Maybe she has more to talk about with regard to your question.
Okay, thanks, Payne. I think you have broken it down well. I think I've seen main points why some of these frictions come up and the way we can go about them. So thanks, yeah.
Thank you, Davis. I see there's a hand that's up. Is it Ertiman or Atiman?
It's Atman. Having that the title for today was Insights for Aspiring Cybersecurity Professionals, how would you break down the process of actually being a cybersecurity professional? If you could just dilute it to start with these 5 things first and catch some momentum, how would you break it down to somebody who actually wants to enter into the market?
Okay, Atman, are there any specifics? Is there a niche?
Oh, I'm guessing, okay, having that cybersecurity is very fragmented with different aspects to it. I'm sure in a general sense, there's a string of knowledge that is tied to everyone, either if you're in cloud computing, either if you're in penetration testing, there are things all of you, when you sit down on a table, you could easily agree on. What are those things and how could somebody actually start to pursue them?
Okay, that's a great question. So part of my work experience so far has been conducting IT audits in line with a regulation by the Central Bank of Kenya, along with the auditing of financial statements, which is an annual requirement at the end of every financial year. And since this is cyclical work, what that means is we often have discussions with different environments and different banks on the state of IT audit. So this covers everything, right from the day-to-day operations that would be the HR information systems, their databases, their payment systems, all the way down to now security, where we're talking about cyber maturity assessments, cyber governance assessments. So this has everything to do with governance, risk, and compliance. So 5 things that I would boil a competent cybersecurity professional into. One would be curiosity. I doubt that you ever get to any point where you're not learning anything new or where you don't have to learn new things. One of those differences are, just the other day, we had a lot of legacy systems and now guys are moving into cloud. So pen testing on legacy systems that are hosted on physical servers, for example, is not a direct glove fit with cloud security. There's things you need to learn. So the first has to be curiosity. Second has to be research skills. And this is where the essence of being able to craft ideas and to learn more about them comes in. So some of the skills within research have a lot to do with creativity, how well you're able to collate different information sources to bring up one central idea that has been explained by different people. And within research skills, it boils over to the third skill, which I would say would be report writing, or generally writing. So actually, we could boil it down to communication as the third skill. So communication here means having the requisite informal and formal communication skills. I know we still haven't gotten to technical skills, but that would be the third thing. Because even with the question that we had from Davis just now, the biggest thing always is how well are you able to communicate cyber risk? When you conduct your VAPT, for example, and you have to present the findings to a client or to the organization, whether it's a high risk finding and you are able to get accounts, for example, and you have dumped some of those hashes and you have passwords, you see, that's very exciting from a technical standpoint. But if you're not able to present that in a report in a way that a decision maker who is, remember the leadership levels I spoke about, who is now at the strategic point, if they don't understand what you mean when you say you are able to do something on responder with NTLM, and then you are able to sniff traffic and you are able to dump hashes, you know, like that might not be immediately digestible by that person. So communication for sure. Then the last thing I would say, the last 2 things, number 4 has to be organization skills. I'm saving the technical skills for number 5. Organization here meaning project management. So project management across different points. You don't necessarily have to be a project manager to have great project management skills, but are you able to meet your deliverables on time? Are you able to communicate challenges that you get in the course of delivering? The risks that you come across at the point of conducting any job or any assignment that you've been given. Are you able to share those with the people around you? Are you able to work well with people? Do you like working in isolation? Are you able to trust the people that you work with well enough? Because we're talking about cybersecurity not being siloed off from different departments in an organization, for example. Or if it's a team of pen testers, how well are you able to work with everyone else? Then lastly, the most important thing I'd say technically is to have a great understanding of computer networking, data structures and organizations, and to a certain level, statistics. I think those are things that will make your work in cybersecurity a lot easier the more you get into advanced concepts. I hope that answers your question, Atman.
Thank you. That has given me it has actually widened my perspective, because when people talk about cybersecurity, they water it down to only having, say, the network plus, security plus certifications. But as you've put it, it's actually bigger than that. The technical skills actually is just a part of the problem. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Atman. Do we have another hand?
Yes, I see we have 2. Okay, we have a hand from Dorothy. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Good
Good
evening.
evening.
Good evening, Dorothy.
Okay, yes, hope I'm audible enough. The session has been so nice. Now I have like 2 questions to inquire as far as cybersecurity, taking a role as a cybersecurity. Will I be right if I say, as a cybersecurity, you have to be jack of all trades? Like now you have to do programming, networking, database, and all those. Is it good to say so? At least you should learn across. And then another thing now is about the trending cyber attacks in Kenya now. For you, maybe just an advice in case you have been told now, can you salvage the situation? How will you go about? Just give a scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. I couldn't have said it better myself. You're right. You do need to have a good understanding across all of those concepts, database, networking. And you'll notice most people who had a good foundation in those areas, they have a very easy time learning other concepts in cyber. Because remember, cyber is simply about protecting these digital assets or these IT assets. So if you don't understand the IT bit itself, then for sure. Your second question is a very complex question because there's a lot of things coming in. So for example, those who've been reading a lot about these attacks, the anonymous Sudan thing, for example, came up, I think, some 2 or 3 months ago. And the news so far is that it's not even people from the country, but some sort of actors. And the reason why that complicates things is, as I mentioned earlier on, we're moving into cyber warfare. Now this is at a state level, and you have a lot of state actors, which means that you're not dealing with people who perhaps just want to break into things for the heck of it. And so when we talk about a state level effort in ensuring cybersecurity, then this has a lot to do with governance. It has to do with governance. It has to do with the policies and legislation that we have. It has to do with how the government is addressing cyber skills and if we have the necessary protection. But how I'd like to answer that question is within what we can and the spheres of influence that we exist in, I think we are doing our best, and Cyber Shuja is an example of such an initiative. So that's how I'd answer that question. It's a very difficult question, especially since that's happening. The victim here is, government service that is critical. So very, very complex question.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take just the last 2, Nico and then Joseph. Nico, you can go ahead. Hello, Nico, are you speaking? Okay, maybe he has some mic issues as he sorts that out. Let's pick Joseph. You had a question? So, Joseph, you're in the meeting. Okay. Nico, are you able to ask your question? I'll assume they're both unreachable at the moment. So kindly, is it okay if they reach out to you via LinkedIn so that they can ask their questions?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. So I think that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much for giving us all that advice and also showing us the need to research and know what is actually going on in the industry and tailor our skills towards the needs that are out there. Thank you again for your time. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you. I think someone's raised their hand.
Yeah, so as you
yeah.
end, so thanks, Payne, for taking the session. I know you had a very hectic schedule the last 2 days, but you're gracious enough to agree to still do this today. So I'm sure the 80-something or so people who joined the call today really benefited in one way or the other. So thank you for remembering to pour back to the people who are coming into the profession. Asante, and wishing you the very best in your career as well.
Thank you so much. I honestly would not be here if it wasn't for you. So thank you.